The first shots came so fast that Tracy Parks did not understand what she was hearing. One second she was at the Port Kaituma airstrip with her family, waiting to leave Guyana on a small plane. The next, gunfire tore across the runway. Men screamed, people dropped. Her mother, Patricia Parks, was hit in the attack. Tracy was 12 years old. Her father, Jerry, saw what was happening and yelled at her and her older sister Brenda to run for the jungle. Tracy had just enough time to see bodies on the ground and confusion exploding around the aircraft before she turned and ran toward the trees. Behind her, the settlement they had tried to escape was beginning to collapse into mass killing. The road to that runway had started long before the shooting. Tracy's parents had joined People's Temple in California when Jim Jones still presented himself as a preacher who talked about equality, discipline, and care for the poor. Like many families, the Parks family was pulled in gradually. They saw films and photographs that described Jonestown, the temple's agricultural settlement in Guyana, as a healthy place where people would be treated fairly, and where life would be better than the one they had left behind. In April 1978, the family went to Guyana and then on to Jonestown. Tracy was still a child. Brenda was older and wanted no part of it, but the decision had already been made for the whole family. What they found was nothing like the promise. Brenda later told investigators that from the first day she hated the place. The cottages were crowded. There was almost no privacy. Work began early and ran through heat and exhaustion. Meals were repetitive and thin. Nights belonged to the pavilion, where Jim Jones talked for hours and where public humiliation was used to break down anyone who questioned him. Tracy also told investigators that the mail was censored and that people who wrote negative things about Jonestown were mocked and punished. People were forced to write letters back to the United States, describing the place as wonderful. The family had arrived in a controlled settlement deep in the Guyanese interior, not a free community. By the fall of 1978, fear inside Jonestown had become part of daily life. White nights, the emergency gatherings Jones called without warning, had taught residents that their lives could be turned upside down at any hour. Security patrols moved through the settlement. Jones did not want members speaking freely to outsiders. When Congressman Leo Ryan came to investigate reports of abuse and coercion, residents were told to be pleasant, careful, and loyal. But the visit changed the balance inside the camp. Once Ryan was physically present, members who had been too afraid to speak suddenly had a way out. DCM Richard Dwyer later reported that several members of the Parks family decided on November 18th that they wanted to leave together with Ryan's party, and Ryan personally reassured them while they gathered their belongings. Even then, leaving was dangerous. Brenda told the FBI that when the family met Ryan and Jones at the pavilion, Jones tried to delay them and asked them to stay longer so their departure would not make People's Temple look bad. The family refused. They wanted to leave that day. Jones finally said they were free to go. He hugged them and told them they could come back any time. On the surface, it sounded calm. Underneath it was already turning ugly. As the people preparing to leave boarded the truck, Don Sly lunged at Ryan with a knife. The attack failed, but it showed how unstable the situation had become. The truck still left for Port Kaituma with Ryan, the defectors, and members of the press, while others stayed behind, believing they would leave the next day. At the airstrip, the danger became visible. The group had to wait because the planes were delayed, and one of them was too small to carry everyone at once. That split the defectors between two aircraft. Tracy and some members of her family were assigned to the smaller plane. Brenda boarded the larger one. Larry Layton, a temple member whom several defectors distrusted, was allowed onto the smaller aircraft. Tracy later told investigators that once the passengers were in place, Layton pulled a handgun and started shooting inside the plane. At almost the same time, a tractor and truck approached the runway. Gunmen opened fire from outside, circling the aircraft and shooting into the larger plane and at the people still on the ground. Congressman Ryan was killed there, along with 3 journalists and 1 defector. Patricia Parks was also killed in the attack. For Tracy, the next few minutes were the dividing line between her old life and everything that followed. Later accounts recalled her kneeling beside her mother, trying to wake her. Her father did what parents sometimes have to do in the worst second of their lives. He forced his child toward survival. He shouted for Tracy and Brenda to get into the jungle and run. Tracy followed Brenda off the airstrip and into the trees. They were not escaping to safety in any normal sense. They were moving into thick rainforest with no plan, little food, and no certainty that the gunman would not follow them. But staying near the runway meant death. The jungle did not care that Tracy was 12. It did not care that Brenda was still a teenager or that the girls had just fled a massacre. For 3 days they moved through heat, mud, insects, and fear. Brenda told the FBI that she and Tracy walked along the Port Kaituma River before finally encountering men in a canoe who asked if they were the Parks sisters. Other later accounts described the sisters stumbling out feverish after days without proper food or shelter. Somewhere during those same hours, back at Jonestown, Jones ordered the mass poisoning that killed more than 900 people in all, including hundreds of children. Tracy and Brenda did not know the full scale of it while they were in the jungle. They only knew they could not go back and could not stop moving. When the girls were finally found, the first real safety came from armed men on the river and then from removal to Georgetown. Brenda told investigators that the canoe men said Dale Parks had already given descriptions of the sisters so rescuers would know who to look for. The sisters crossed the river, met the Guyana Defense Force, and were taken out. Only then did the full truth begin to come in. Jonestown was not a crime scene with scattered victims. It was a field of bodies. In all, 918 people died in Jonestown, at the Port Kaituma airstrip, and in Georgetown. San Diego State University's Jonestown archive records that 304 of the dead were children and minors. Tracy had escaped one killing ground only to learn that most of the people she had known in Jonestown were dead, including members of her own family. The horror did not stop when Tracy got home. Survivors carried Jonestown forward in their bodies and minds for decades. People later reported that Tracy lost 5 family members in the events of November 18th. As an adult, she rejected the idea that what happened should be softened into a story of willing death. She called it murder. That mattered because she had been there. She had seen the fear before the airstrip, the gunfire at the runway, the body of her mother, and the jungle that became the only reason she lived. Tracy Parks survived Jonestown not because she was protected, but because in the middle of panic, her father made a brutal choice, and she obeyed it. She ran into the trees while the settlement behind her moved toward one of the worst mass killings in American history. She stayed alive long enough to come out the other side. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more stories of those who faced the impossible and lived.